This last part of your lecture, we are going to discuss the prerequisites and program design for plyometrics. So when we talk about prerequisites, essentially what we're saying is what things should we make sure our clients can do before we have them engage in plyometric training. So what we're going to go about discussing in the next few slides are prerequisites that a lot of organizations, strength-based organizations, including NSCA, include for us to use before we use plyometric training with our clients. With that said, there are some, and you're going to see these in a moment, that are so challenging that many of us can't achieve. And so I want you to take these prerequisites with a grain of salt. And the number one most important thing you need to do is to make sure that your client has a good foundation before they engage in any type of plyometric movement. So for instance, if they can't do a static or a basic dynamic squat, if they can't do a basic dynamic squat without having knee valgus, then we certainly don't need to have them do squat jumps, right? So building on that foundation of good body mechanics. So let's start with some basic prerequisites. So they're broken into static and dynamic. So static stability, essentially when you see SL, that means single leg. So we should be able to have our clients do a single leg stance for 30 seconds with their eyes opened and eyes closed. They should also be able to do a single leg 1/4 squat for 30 seconds, both eyes open and eyes closed, as well as a single leg half squat for 30 seconds, eyes open and eyes closed. So this is static. So this isn't a squat up and down. This is bringing it down to a squat and holding. And then in addition to holding then that different squat position, having your eyes open and closed. So those seem like, okay, yeah, that's probably something we can have our clients do. Then we're gonna move on to the dynamic movement tests. So looking at their jumping, both vertically and for distance on a single leg. And there's different scoring for this, and essentially what you wanna look for is, again, can they do that single leg jump and make sure that their mechanics are there. When they land, are they seeing knee valgus or varus? Are they seeing them landing in a nice neutral position? Are they kind of hinging forward and losing their balance? And then there's also something known as a functional hop test, okay? What you tend to see more from the NSCA perspective are basically like how much can they lift in reference to their 1RM. And the ones I'm about to show you do seem a little bit more challenging than the previous slide. So NSCA recommends that for lower body plyometrics, a client needs to be able to squat at least 1.5 times greater than his or her body weight. This is a 1RM. So 1.5 times greater than their body weight. So right now I want you to think about what your body weight is and whether or not you can squat 1.5 times that weight. And if you can, technically NSCA says that you should be able to move forward with lower body plyometrics. And if you can't, then you're thinking, but I probably already do plyometrics, right? But I'm not meeting this prerequisite. Okay. Similarly with upper body plyometrics, NSCA says that if you have a client who weighs more than 220 pounds, their 1RM bench press needs to be at least 1 times their body weight. However, if they weigh less than 220 pounds, their 1RM bench press needs to be at least 1.5 times their body weight. So again, I want you to pause and think about the math, right? Do 1.5 times your body weight if you're less than 220 pounds, or if you're more, do 1 time your body weight. Are you able to bench that much? Many of us are going to think, there's no way I could do that, right? I'm strong, but I'm not that strong. Does that mean I shouldn't be able to do plyometric exercises? I would argue no. Right? I would argue that these prerequisites are really, really challenging, and in many ways would be a barrier for many of our clients to do. So an alternative, just to make sure I highlight this for this kind of 1RM bench press, is alternating the, adding in different push-ups. So the ability to perform 5 clap push-ups in a row. And to be clear, those are doing a push-up, clapping in between the push-up, and doing another push-up. If you can do 5 of those, then you can do upper body plyometrics. What's funny to me about this is that this is a guideline from NSCA, and what they're asking you to do as a prereq is in and of itself a plyometric exercise. So I want you to take this with a grain of salt, because yes, it's important to make sure that our clients are ready to move on and do plyometric movements. But probably the best way to do that is to assess them as a whole person, to look at their total body mechanics, and to progress, right? I certainly don't think that we need to inhibit our clients from doing plyometrics if they can't bench 1.5 times their body weight or squat 1.5 times their body weight. So again, important that we understand that these are NSCA's prereqs, but I also want you to know, like, kind of in real life, this shouldn't be something that's stopping you if you think your client can handle plyometric training safely. So in order for us to gain optimal benefits from plyometric training, our clients, right, need to be well conditioned and have a nice strength and endurance based conditioning, right? So that needs to exist already. So you're not going to take a brand new client who's new to physical activity and have them do plyometrics. Okay, that's probably not the best way to do it because they haven't kind of earned their progression, right? We don't know if their mechanics during a basic dynamic movement pattern is safe before we add speed and explosiveness, right? Our client should also exhibit athletic abilities, coordination and proprioception abilities, and they need to be free of pain or any type of injury. So if you have a client who has knee pain or knee injuries or an ankle injury or things like that, adding this kind of athletic plyometric movement is probably not the best way to progress them. Once they're free of that pain and or injury, then you can move forward and have them do that. To be clear, plyometric training shouldn't be the only type of training that you do with your client. It's a supplementary thing, right? So it's not exclusive to a training program, but it's something that you can add to a training program based on your client's goals. So there are different sources of resistance for plyometric training. Obviously, your body weight is the number one type of resistance that you can include, and oftentimes people, that's all they use for their plyometric training. But you certainly can add external forces, and this could be anything from elastic tubing or bands to weighted vests to weighted balls. So there's multiple different types of equipment that you can use for your plyometric training. So now let's get into your program design. I want you to pause right now and I want you to think about what are some things that you need to consider when you're designing a plyometric program for your clients. So pause, maybe even type or write down some things right now. So what are things that you need to consider, right? First thing is you want to make sure you consider their age, right? How old are they? What's their body weight? Because their body weight is going to determine how much force they're using and or needing to do this plyometric movement, right? What's their kind of competitive level or their athletic training level? What surface are you using this on? Are you on a grass surface or are you on a hard surface, right? Or do you have athletic flooring? What footwear are they wearing? Do they engage in proper technique? Are you following the correct progression, right? If you're having them do split lunge jumps, have they already proven that they can do alternating dynamic lunges without any biomechanical issues, right? And then most important, right, what's the goal of their program? If their goal doesn't include anything to do with speed or agility or even weight loss, right, then why are we including plyometric training? So making sure that it is justified in your exercise programming. Some other things to consider with program design is the direction of the body movement. So we know that horizontal body movement is less stressful than vertical movement. So vertical movement, an example would be a squat jump. A horizontal body movement would be a broad jump, right, or a frog jump. So if you're doing just up and down movements, that's going to include more loads in the joints, okay? And it's dependent on technical proficiency. So we want to make sure that they can earn their progression. We also need to think about the weight of the athlete. I mentioned that in that last slide, right? The heavier they are, the greater the training demand is placed on that athlete. We need to think through the speed of execution. So if you have faster speeds, you're going to increase the demand on the individual, as well as the external load. So as you add load to it, you're going to increase the training demand. What's so important about plyometric training is that plyometric training is not about how much you can lift, right? How much you can lift in speed is power. When we're thinking about plyometric training, remember, we're remembering this quick eccentric followed by a quick concentric. And as you add weight or an external load, you want to make sure that that weight doesn't slow the speed of the movement. Because if it slows the speed of the movement, then you're really taking away the plyometric piece of that movement. We also want to consider intensity, so the amount of effort that they're putting out. Can it be controlled by the type of exercise that they're doing? If they do single leg versus double leg, progressing from simple to complex activity, and then also adding external weight or increasing the height of what they're, if you're using box jumps, which is very common, increasing the weight or the height of that box jump. You can alter volume by adding the amount of work that they're doing, and you can do this usually in plyometrics. The amount of work that you're doing is represented as the number of reps or the number of contacts. So oftentimes you'll see, there was 40 contacts with the right foot. And what that essentially means is that right foot made contact with the ground 40 times, right? You can also see volume expressed as 8 to 12 if they're doing things that you can actually measure in reps. You can also see, it shouldn't exclude or, go fat more than like this period of time. So you could say you're going to be doing squat jumps for 30 seconds, but what's most important for volume is that you typically don't see plyometric training, true plyometric training, ever exceed 30 minutes. And that's the nature of the training. It's very high demand, it's challenging, it's not just strength, but it's also cardiovascular, like I mentioned earlier. So 30 minutes tends to be the limit to how long we recommend plyometric training be programmed for. And then frequency, every 48 to 72 hours, you need rest because it is higher intensity, so you're gonna need that full recovery. Other things we need to look through is age. So younger ages should be doing plyometric training. If you think about kids and their movement patterns, oftentimes kids' movement patterns, just especially young kids, they do plyometric training by nature, right? They're jumping around and they're moving quickly and they're very agile. So kids and youth are athletes in kind of their natural movements. And so plyometric training can be really helpful for youth sports, but we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's safe. So when we start to train our youth athletes, making sure that we're looking at things like posture, landing, knee valgus varus, etc. Okay, but we do know from research that plyometric training in youth has resulted in increased strength gains as well as increased bone mineral density, particularly in females. Recovery time, making sure there's some rest in between each exercise set because it is cardiovascular in nature. Longer recovery periods should be used to allow restoration of metabolic storage so that you can use that energy to do that quick movement. And anywhere from 60 to 120 seconds between drills should be enough for you to do that movement again. So here are some instructions that you can use for your clients, right? Feet should be nearly flat in all landings. And essentially what that means is you want to avoid landing only on the balls of your feet because that might make you lose balance. And you want to land with your whole foot and keep your weight evenly distributed kind of on your heels and toes. So it's not like you're landing like this, but it's in kind of an athletic, flat-footed landing, okay? Individuals should be encouraged to touch and go, and that's where that eccentric to concentric phase is. So remembering that amortization phase, that touch and go, we want that amortization phase to be as small as possible. And so that's where that touch and go, that's what we mean by touch and go. And it refers to landing as quickly as possible, right? So we want the landing to be quick so that that explosive movement can also be quick and powerful. And the quicker we make that landing or that eccentric movement, the more powerful we can make that concentric movement. So here are some guidelines. We need sound technical foundation with our clients or movement-based patterns. So they need to earn their progressions, right? They should be specific to the goals of the athlete. So don't just have them do broad jumps if they're not going to be doing any kind of horizontal movement, right? The quality of plyometrics is way more important than the quantity. And this is where a lot of fitness professionals kind of don't remember the guidelines for plyometric training. We're just trying to challenge our clients. We want them to work really, really hard. We want them to remember this workout, and we kind of forget about quality. So quality is more important than quantity. And the greater the exercise intensity, the greater the recovery time. It can have its greatest benefits at the conclusion of the workout. However, I will say if you're working with a client who's newer to plyometrics, you probably want to have this in the beginning because they have more energy. If you're working with athletes who have been doing plyometric training, it might be a good idea to play around with that timing and do plyometric training towards the end of your workout when in reality, in their athletic kind of actual performances, they're going to be fatigued. So it's important to train them under a fatigued status as well. When proper technique can no longer be demonstrated, the max volume has been achieved and the exercise must be stopped. So when you start to see your client demonstrate some poor body mechanics, that's when we need to stop the plyometric training. Some other guidelines for plyometric training include activities need to be progressive in nature. I mentioned that multiple times. Your sessions should be conducted no more than 3 times a week, and this is during preseason. And then during your actual competitive season, if you're working with athletes, that needs to be reduced to 2 times per week. Again, playing around with intensity. And the key element with plyometric training is proper technique during that eccentric as well as that landing phase. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm looking forward to doing some of these exercises and playing around with plyometric training in lab.